Good morning. Today is September 25th, 2023. I'm Frank Farmer, and we're here today as part of the Veterans History Project. This is a project authorized by Congress and administered by the Library of Congress. The objective is to interview those veterans from World War II to the present. The library archives these videos and makes them available to the public both in person and online. The library also encourages local venues such as historical societies and museums like the one we're in today, the New Smyrna Museum of History, to keep these on file and make them available to the local population. Today we have with us a retired Rear Admiral, Admiral John Elnitsky. Before I formally introduce Admiral Elnitsky, let me say a few words about his background. He's a graduate of the Naval Academy. Spent over 30 years in the service of this country, commanded nuclear submarines, which we'll talk about today, and had some other interesting assignments. So, Admiral, thank you very much, sir, first of all, for your service to this country and for agreeing to come down here and share your story with us today.
Well, thank you, and thanks for putting up with me.
Okay. Well, first of all, I know you live now in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, but where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Whitehall, PA, just outside of Allentown. Father worked for Social Security, and I went to high school in Whitehall.
Did you have any members of your family or that were in the military, or uncles, or?
Oh yeah, grandfather? That was probably a big part of my influence. So most of my uncles served in World War II, and everything from Marine Corps to Army. I still talk to them even though they were Army. Navy officers. Had one uncle that was in Battle of the Bulge, one that fought in Okinawa.
So you did have a lot of family influence for the military.
And my father was in the Coast Guard, so he was a Coast Guardsman, went in right out of high school, right at the end of World War II.
So did you develop an interest in going to the Naval Academy while in high school, or what were your interests?
Yeah, a little bit. I got to admit, my father was probably the guy that was most influential in getting me to go to the Naval Academy. It was pretty clear when I was in high school that if I was going to go to college, I was going to go on some sort of scholarship program. That was the only way, really, we were going to be able to afford it. So we applied to ROTC programs, the Coast Guard Academy, Naval Academy. And I think I told you in one of the stories, I actually thought I was going to go to Coast Guard Academy. I had gone and visited up in New London, really liked it. Had not had an appointment to the Naval Academy yet, so figured that's where I'm going, and came back from my trip to the Coast Guard, and my appointment to the Naval Academy had shown up. So.
And what year did you enter the Naval Academy?
Went in 1976, so I date myself now.
1976, and the Vietnam War was over by 1976. But you had lived through the Vietnam years when you were in high school. Yeah. You knew about the Vietnam War, and so you knew that going into any military branch could take you in harm's way, I assume.
Well, that was certainly part of it, and I had cousins that were in during the Vietnam War. One cousin that was very influential, my cousin Danny, was on submarines in the North Atlantic. He operated out of Holy Lock on some of the SSBN. So those guys were influential in saying, hey, this is not a bad place to start.
Now, when you entered the Naval Academy, are there different majors at the Naval Academy, or is it all an engineering curriculum? Do you have any choices as you go through?
There are majors, and in fact, one of the things that made the Naval Academy appeal was they actually had designated degrees. So you could get a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering, or you could get a Bachelor's in Electrical Engineering. You could even become a poli-sci major if that's what you want to do. So you could pick what you wanted it to be.
And what was your major?
I was a mechanical engineering major.
Okay, so you had decided that early on, or?
Well, I had decided I wanted to get into the nuclear program. So this was, in the late 70s. Admiral Rickover was in charge of the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program. It was the growing field, and that seemed to be the most challenging area to get into. So that's why I tried.
I know in my former conversation with you that you value leadership and leadership abilities and mentoring people. Tell me what did you learn about those qualities at the Naval Academy?
I'll tell you, the biggest thing I think, you take away a lot of lessons from the Naval Academy, but the thing that stuck with me the most was really how to organize a team and motivate a team. And this may sound a little funny, but I think I learned the most of that from my swimming coach. of all people. He knew how to get that team to do things that we really should, well above what we were capable of. And he was a large part responsible for why I got to the academy in the first place, because he had asked for me to come, and was very influential in teaching us all about what it means to be in charge of a team and lead a team.
Now, at the Naval Academy, first of all, it's a pretty rigorous school of study.
Well, it's a trade school, effectively. But
Okay. Well, how many people were with you? Do you remember it entered your plebe year?
I think we had 1,300 that came in. We were also the first class to have women. So we had 80 women, and I think 1,300 overall. And if I remember right, we graduated like 850, maybe 900, somewhere in that ballpark. Not exactly sure.
So the attrition rate was fairly significant then.
Pretty normal though. So that's about, most of the classes, about a third of the midshipmen that come in as plebes during plebe summer are gone by the time you graduate.
Did you play any sports at the academy?
I did. I was a swimmer. Did that for 4 years.
What style is or what?
I was a butterflyer.
Butterfly.
Yeah, I was never as good in college as I was in high school, but it was still a great team and a great thing to keep you on the right track, so to speak.
You still swim today?
A little bit. Not as much as I need to, but a little.
Now, as you approached graduation and went through those 4 years, and we could probably spend 3 or 4 hours talking about your time at the Naval Academy, but as you approached graduation and went through it, you had to choose what route you wanted to, and what route did you choose, and why did you choose that
so everyone,
route?
when they graduate, when they're in their senior year, first class year, they get to pick what they want to be. So they have what they call service selection night, and I decided, kind of like I knew when I came in, that the most challenging place to be was in nuclear power. That was the emerging technology at the time in the late 70s, and I had this great idea. My plan was I would go to nuclear power, I'd spend 5 years in the Navy, and then I would get out and go work in the nuclear power industry. And I did exactly that 30 years later. Now, that was my plan, though. Because when you're 17, you know everything, right? So that was my plan.
So that was 30 years later. Your plan came
to fruition.
Well, after you graduated from the academy, and of course that would have been in '80. Is that correct?
That's it, yes, sir.
In '80, you graduated, and you'd chosen the nuclear power route.
Yep.
Tell us about your initial training as a naval officer and the nuclear.
Well, you start off with very technical piece of it, and so in the early part of your career, it's all about learning how to operate a reactor, learning how to operate a nuclear-powered ship, getting qualified. So we spent literally a year going through additional training, first in nuclear power school in Orlando, Florida, which I was very fortunate to meet my bride of over 40 years now, Christine, and then from nuclear power school to prototype, and prototype was up in New York, where you actually operate a land-based reactor, and then off to my first ship.
And what year did you get on your first ship?
That would have been 1982. Yep. Yeah. So
submarine?
Yeah, submarine. I was on USS Omaha out of Pearl Harbor. I asked for, I think we had got to pick where you wanted to go. I said, well, I'd like to either go to a boomer out of Charleston or a fast attack out of San Diego. So I went to fast attack in Pearl Harbor.
Now tell us, for the audience, you mentioned the word boomer
Yep.
and fast attack. Tell us what's the difference in a boomer and a fast attack.
Good. So a fast attack submarine back in those days were the SSNs. So their mission, and the Omaha's mission was basically to either support the battle groups, the carrier battle groups, or go out and basically search for Russian submarines and follow Russian submarines. The boomers are more officially known as the Fleet Ballistic Missile Submarines. Their mission is strategic deterrence. So they're the ones that carry nuclear weapons, long-range nuclear missiles, and that's their job.
So your first assignment was to the attack, the fast attack.
Yeah, fast
and
attack.
later on, and we'll talk about that later on, you commanded a boomer, did you not?
Yes.
We'll talk about it. But on your first deployment, tell us how long. First of all, someone like me who has claustrophobia, that doesn't sound like a real thing that I want to do. But what was life like on a fast attack submarine, as far as the environment and?
So it was an interesting time. So this is, Ronald Reagan's president We're in kind of the height of the Cold War era. And the fast attack submarines had very high operating tempos in the Pacific. So I used to joke with Christine. I would say we come in, and I'd tell her, all right, come in on a Friday, so we're going to be in for 2 weeks. And then they would call up on Sunday and say, you're getting underway tomorrow. And so it was that kind of rotation. But normally you would deploy for about 6 months at a time. And in those days, going out of Pearl Harbor, you were going to the Western Pacific. And you'd get some port calls along the way, but for the most part, you were gone about 6 months. And then back to Pearl Harbor.
Well, on those 6 months, did you see your family at all, or?
Dependent, not a lot. So it's probably just as hard on the family as it is on the crew, because they're having to do all the stuff at home while you're gone. And this is in the days before internet, days before cell phones, so there wasn't a lot of communication back then. So every now and then you'd get a port call. So Christine got to come to, let's see, help me out here, Perth, Australia, the Philippines, a very classic spot to come, Subic Bay in the Philippines. So she got to make a couple of visits. Just to finish that thought, we had great mentor even back then, before Christine and I were married, a retired submarine officer that lived in Orlando, and told us, says, whatever you do, no matter how much it costs, go visit the boats when it goes to other ports. And we tried to do that as much as we could.
Did the Navy help make arrangements for the?
Oh, no.
No, that's on you. That's on the
Yeah.
sailors, right?
That's it. Yes, sir.
Gosh, that's got to be tough on a sailor's life, especially back then when you didn't have the internet and you didn't have cell phones and those things. That amazes me that, and I assume that once people join the submarine service, that they stay there for a long time in the submarine service.
Yeah, they tend to be very motivated group of individuals. At least that's what I found. Every crew I was on, I was always impressed by the dedication and service. And you're right, it was not just about the sailors, but it's about their families as well. Because if the family's not supportive, it doesn't work. And it's a tough lifestyle. There's no doubt about it.
And again, obviously the Navy, when I say the Navy, I'm talking about the echelons of the Navy all the way up to the Secretary of the Navy, to the Secretary of Defense. They must know this. They must know how much it costs to train, how long it takes to train. And I assume that they did everything they could do to try to alleviate the stress. Is that the wrong assumption?
No, that's very true, and that continues today. There was always a lot of effort to try to provide support for the wives, but a lot of it, the spouses did it themselves. They built their own networks, their own groups to help themselves out, and made it a little more manageable.
Now, how long were you on the fast attack submarine?
So I was on my first one on the Omaha about 3 years. So there your whole job is to qualify and learn how to drive a ship, learn how to operate the ship overall, and get ready for your next assignment.
So people that originally go into the submarine service, when they go on their first submarine, many of them do not have, as you have, I see the dolphin insignia over there. Is that right? Which signifies that you're a qualified submariner. Is that correct?
That is correct. So your job as an ensign when you come on board a ship like that is really to learn from the crew that's there and learn from that team. So you have to qualify engineer officer watch, which is how you operate the reactor. You qualify officer of the deck, and ultimately you get to qualify in submarines. And I was lucky. I had a great commanding officer, Captain Bart Clark, rest his soul. Really good guy, and it was kind of interesting because he was learning how to be a commanding officer. He got to the boat about a month before I did, so he was learning how to be a commanding officer at the same time I'm learning how to just be an ensign. And it was kind of fun because we both have had some interesting stories together and some interesting challenges along the way. But all in all, it was a great opportunity and a great leader to work for.
And you said you did get a chance to visit some pretty spectacular places, I assume.
Yeah, we let's see. My first deployment, we went into Yokosuka, went to Mombasa, Kenya, of all places. Philippines a couple of times, Guam, Singapore. So mostly that Western Pacific.
So you were operating that's where Soviet submarines were operating too, isn't it?
That's correct. That's part of why we were there.
Yep. I won't get into asking if you had any encounters with Soviet submarines or things like that, because some of that may still be classified. I'm not.
Well,
sure.
the mission was, and you and I have talked about this, the job in those days for the fast attack submarines was to go into areas close to Russian ports and try to find specifically their SSBNs, their boomers, that were going on patrol and try to get in trail of one of those. And that was part of the whole Cold War effort. So it was not only about breaking the Soviet Union economically, but it was also about being able to say, in Reagan's case, well, I know where your ships were. Because this whole concept of deterrence was all about, well, we can send our SSBNs out to sea undetected, and you send yours out, we know where they are. And that was part of the whole. So that was our job, was to make that second half a reality.
Did the Soviets know that we knew that?
They did eventually, yes.
But not during
the Cold War.
Not during the Cold War. But what was your opinion about the Soviet submarine service at that time? What were the Americans being told about, I guess, the Soviet submarine service?
We knew a lot about their ships. We knew a lot about how they're operated, but there was a lot you didn't know, because they were very secretive, just like we were. What I would say is the big advantage was, and it really comes down to acoustics. So our submarines were quieter and had better sensors than their submarines. So their submarines were noisier in those days and easier to detect. And what that allows you to do is you can pick them up and detect them before they know you're there. And that was really the big part of the whole effort, was about that acoustic superiority.
Now, I assume that a fast attack submarine is smaller than a ballistic missile submarine. What was the number of crew that you had on your submarine?
So the fast attack was about 135 crew, so 14 officers, 135 crew. The SSBN, so when I had command of the USS Maine many years later, that was 175. And about 16 officers. And the difference there is the part of the crew that's associated with all the missile work. So your missile technicians and the people that do that part of the effort.
So you were on the fast attack submarine, the first one, for 3 years.
Yep.
Where'd you go after that, sir?
Really challenging duty. I had to go to Monterey, California to postgraduate school. It was tough, but somebody had to do it.
Was that in nuclear power? Or was that,
No, that was actually, I got an opportunity to get a master's and an engineer's degree in mechanical engineering. So the Navy is really smart. So again, remember my plan, 5 years,
yes,
and I'm going to get out. So my 5 years are coming up, and Christine and I are talking about, well, we're going to look for a civilian job and start thinking about getting out. And then, of course, the Navy approaches you and says, hey, how'd you like to go to postgraduate school? And we'll pay for it. And you get to go to Monterey. And it's kind of hard to turn that down. So,
of course, that came with some obligation.
A little bit
afterwards, doesn't
yeah,
it? So
yeah.
they.
And then by the time you're done with that, you're about halfway through your career, and you look around and say, well, why would I get out now?
As you made your way up the command, when you left fast attack, what was your rank, sir?
So when I left my first boat, I was a lieutenant, went to postgraduate school, and then after postgraduate school, went on to my next fast attack submarine, the Newport News, which was a ship being constructed in Newport News, Virginia. So that was a very interesting assignment.
So that was the second fast attack submarine, and that was your second assignment?
Yes, sir.
And how long were you on that ship?
So I was on that boat about another 3 years, and that was kind of a fun assignment because, again, it was a different kind of crew. So that crew was all about building a ship, building a submarine in the shipyard. So we had to go from a shipyard mentality to operations. And then ultimately on the Newport News, we got to deploy for Desert Storm. So we went into the Mediterranean during the first Desert Storm, first Iraqi war.
Okay. Now on any submarine, I assume there is... I guess what I'm trying to ask is that on any submarine, a submarine takes on its own, and the crew takes on its own character, I assume. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a big reflection of the leadership and the officers that are in charge, but the crew does have its standards. And it's kind of interesting because one of the things with Newport News is that tradition of excellence, that crew and how they operate, a lot of that gets formed during new construction because you bring officers and enlisted men from all over the Navy, from different submarines, and you kind of come together and you build a whole new culture. And so that was a great opportunity, a great learning experience.
Now, a submarine with nuclear power, I assume, can go on forever, pretty much, can it? With the power.
Pretty much so. So you make your own electricity, obviously. You have your own propulsion. You make your own water, make your own oxygen. You clean your atmosphere. You take care of all your sanitary. So basically everything could go on for a very long time. The big challenge is you've ultimately run out of food. That's the Achilles heel, so to speak.
How long has what's the longest that a U.S., as far as you know, submarine has been able to stay out on deployment without coming back? How long before they run out of food?
Normally, so on the fast attacks, we would carry about 120 days worth of food. SSBNs were pretty similar, 120, 130 days worth of food. How long has one ever stayed out? I don't know. I can tell you mine, we were out just over 100 days on one. So I've done deployments that long. But, what's the longest ever? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Now, the World War II submarines, they were pretty cramped and a lot different, I assume, than the present submarines, right? I mean, the present submarines, I'm sure, are fairly cramped still, are they not? But nothing like the World War II, the diesel submarines?
World War II boats were very cramped, very small crews, very small ships, and a very different way of operating. So, diesel boats ran around on the surface and submerged to attack, whereas SSN runs around submerged and only has to come to periscope depth when it's trying to communicate or find surface contacts.
As you made your way up the command ladder and you said you were on, were to your second attack submarine, were you on another fast attack submarine?
I got to do 3 all together. So after Newport News, I went to a shore tour and then back to submarines again, this time to the pre-commissioning unit on the Tucson, which was another one of the latest SSNs. And so I got to do that evolution again. I guess they figured out I had figured it out well enough on Newport News that we got to give you another shot at it.
Now, working with these different crews and with different commanders, and I think we've had a discussion about what traits did you see displayed in a commander that helped you to develop your leadership style? And
it's interesting because now, of course, in hindsight, you look back and you say, boy, that was an important lesson I learned from that commanding officer. But there are a couple of things that I think kind of go through those 3 ships that I was on and even some of the short tours. And the biggest thing was every really good commanding officer I ever served with, it was all about giving the people the leadership they deserved. He recognized that it was not about him, it was about his crew. So they were very clear in, what are my expectations? What does I expect you to do as one of the members of the crew? And then they kind of got out of your way. And they said, all right, I've told you what I expect. Now go do your job. Go do it. Don't come to me asking permission to do everything. Go do your job. Tell me what your intentions are. And if I think you're getting off track, I'll tell you, but I expect you to do your job. And they were very clear about that. And the best ones were very clear about, if I'm doing something wrong, I expect you to come tell me. Open my door and say, Captain, that's a bad idea. You're making a mistake. And that's a really hard thing for a commanding officer to do, and it's even harder to get to the point where your crew is willing to do that.
That's a pretty hard thing for a 18 or a 19-year-old sailor who's been in the service for a year or so to question or to bring up something to a guy who's been around for a long time.
Yeah, literally the old man, which is what they would call you because you're one of the oldest guys on the boat. So,
and you were, 20-some years old at that time?
Oh, no. When I went into command, I was in my 40s.
40s?
Yeah, I was in my 40s. When I went into command, I had got, again, some great counsel and some great mentorship from my leaders. And they said, look, you're going to a very different ship. I'd never been on an SSBN before. As I just told you, I've been on 3 fast attacks, so now you're going to go do something totally different. Not only never been assigned to an SSBN, never even really been for more than a night on an SSBN. So the whole idea, how do they operate? What's a patrol like? What does it mean to be on alert? How does all that work? Really new to me. So it was pretty clear to me I needed a way to be able to get that 18-year-old to say, hey, Captain, you're making a mistake. So I started off with saying, hey, these are my expectations. I had my 5 basics I used to talk to them about. These are the things I expect. This is how I want you to do business. Now go do it. And by the way, don't be afraid to come ask a question, or don't be afraid to provide what I used to call forceful backup. Don't be afraid to say, Skipper, you're making a mistake. And of course, when I first started doing that, I would do things like go into the control room while the ship's at 400 feet, 15 knots, and say, raising number 2 scope, and do just like you see in the old World War II movies, grab the scope ring and pretend I'm going to raise the number 2 scope. And if you do that at 400 feet and 15 knots, you're going to break the scope. You're going to bend over $1 million piece of equipment. You're going to start a seawater leak. That's not a good day at sea. And I would wait for the people in the control room, those 18-year-olds, to say something. Say, Captain, you can't do that. And when I first started doing that, no one would say anything. Quiet. So I'd stop, and I'd get the whole watch section relieved, and we would go down to the wardroom, and we'd have a chat about, why were you afraid to say anything? And not surprisingly, the 18-year-olds would go, well, you're the old man. You know everything. I wasn't going to say anything. I said, well, I don't. And I'd kind of reinforce that point. I don't know everything. You know a lot of things that I don't know. Almost as concerning were the chief petty officers, the senior enlisted on the boat, because they were in the control room too, and they didn't say anything. I said, Chief, why didn't you say something? Well, we didn't think you'd really do it. Well, yeah, but Chief, what if I have a different set of information than you have? What if because if we were 400 feet and 5 knots, that would have been fine to raise the scope. So what if I have a different set of data than you do? So, Chiefs, you got to do the same thing I do. And part of it was reinforcing with those chiefs that they needed to do the same thing with their folks. They needed to build that environment where people weren't afraid to ask questions and provide forceful backup.
Now, here you have a crew comprised of sometimes teenagers, people or early 20s, and but yet they operated a intricate piece of machinery. They had great responsibilities. Tell us about some of your remembrance of your crew's background. I assume that a submarine crew is kind of a cross-section of America.
They really are. And in my change of command speech when I left the USS Maine, I actually went through, my whole speech was, where do they find these American heroes? And it was all about, they find them in places like Topeka, Kansas, and, fireman so-and-so. And you're right, they come from all over, and, very unique backgrounds and very dedicated to what they do. I'll tell you maybe just 2 quick stories. When I was commanding officer, I had a machinist mate that worked for me, Petty Officer Raines, and I would go into the engine room, and he'd be standing in the lower level watch in the engine room, which is one of the very early watch stations that you learn. You run the condensate system and things like that. And I'd go looking for him, and I could never find him. I'd say, Raines, where are you? And he'd be down in a bilge cleaning something, like way underneath a piece of pipe with a flashlight. I'd say, Raines, what the hell are you doing down there? He says, well, Captain, this is where the dirt is. And he would do, and that was the kind of dedication to making sure that ship was ready, and it was clean, and it was ready to fight. My chief of the boat, when I went to my first patrol, Master Chief Loy, when I completed my first strategic deterrent patrol, he actually completed his 20th. So when you do that, you go from wearing what's called a silver patrol pin to a gold patrol pin. And I still have it to this day. He gave me his old patrol pin. So, here's a guy that had been in that business for 20 years and certainly was not afraid to say, hey, Skipper, you're making a mistake. Here's what you got to do differently. It was a great guy. You've
mentioned several times the chief of the boat. Tell us about the chief of the boat and what does that mean and what does that entail?
The chief of the boat is really your right-hand man. The executive officer is number 2 in command, but chief of the boat is a senior enlisted man. He's usually been in 30 years in some cases. So when I went to command, my chief of the boat, I think, was on his 25th year of service, and they've been around the block. And they're the guys that you really count on to help bring that enlisted crew along. So, they're the big brothers. If the commanding officer is dad, they're the big brothers that are taking care of the enlisted guys, and really were pivotal. And Master Chief Loy was a big part of it to getting to the point where that 18-year-old is not afraid to speak up and say, hey, Captain, I think you're making a mistake.
Now, we've talked about the enlisted personnel and their backgrounds and their great responsibility, and obviously you have great admiration and respect for them. Did any of the enlisted personnel that you commanded go on to officer school and
they
become
did.
officers?
And thanks for reminding me of that, because that's one of the things there's something I'm proud about from my command tour. That's one of the keys. We had 8 enlisted men that actually got their commission. Everything from, back in those days, they had a thing called Seaman Admiral Program, where the CNO, Chief of Naval Operations, would actually pick seamen and say, we're going to send you to college to go get a degree and become an officer. So we had a couple of folks that got to do that, a couple of our men. We had 2 that got to go to the Naval Academy, got appointments to the Naval Academy under the Navy direct appointment program, and have since gone on to have great careers of their own.
That's tremendous. I'm sure, obviously, you're very proud of that, and you should be. Tell me this: as you advanced on in command, did you command one ballistic or more than?
Just one. Yeah, I had one command tour. I was fortunate because about the time I got to command, Admiral DeMars was the head of the Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program, and he decided to make a change. We used to go. Officers would go command an attack submarine, and then they would get promoted to captain, and they would go command an SSBN, a Trident submarine. And he made the change and said, we can't afford to do that anymore. We have too many folks that are not going to be able to get their command tours if we do that, because this was post-Berlin Wall coming down, so the Navy was starting to draw down. And he said, let's let the commanders go. It goes back to that thing, show them what the right thing to do is and let them go do it. And he said, let's let these commanders go be in charge of Trident submarines. So I think I was like the second officer that was a commander that had a command of a Trident submarine.
Okay. Now, after the command of the submarine, of the ballistic missile, where were you posted then, sir?
So I had made the decision while I was coming up through my career, since I built 2 submarines, I liked that side of the work. So I became an acquisition professional, went to work for the Naval Sea Systems Command.
Was that in Washington?
Well, it is in Washington. It was in Crystal City, and then later at the Navy Yard. But my first assignment coming out of command was to go out to San Diego to the Space and Naval Warfare Command. And there's a funny story about that one. Admiral Antonitis was the senior admiral out at Space and Naval Warfare Command. He came back to an event in Kings Bay where I was in command. He said, John, what would you think of coming to San Diego? And I said, that sounds like a great idea. He says, that's good, because it wasn't really a question. So that's where I ended up going.
Well, most of the time the military.
Yeah, it's not a question.
Yeah, they may pose it as a question, but it's not a question.
Exactly.
It's not even a suggestion.
That's it. Yes, sir.
The next question I have, you've already answered it pretty well, but let me ask again, how would you describe the average typical submariner, young sailor, as to motivation, dedication to their country, to their shipmates, and to the boat?
I think the simplest thing I would say is they're all American heroes. They volunteer for that. It's a tough job. They're smart. A lot of them have college degrees, even though they're enlisted, and they really like what they're doing. And they have a challenging job. I know you heard the story I told once before about being out and following a Russian submarine and getting to the point where we run out of food. And literally you're down to peanut butter, not bread and peanut butter, just peanut butter. And there wasn't a guy on the boat that complained, because they knew that was the job. You go do the job, and that's what you do. So I really think of them as American heroes, and it was an honor to have the opportunity to serve with them.
Now, when a boat came back from a deployment, 4 to 6 months, did the sailors get extra time off at the home port, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or?
Usually you got some leave. They got a chance to go decompress. But the challenge was you come back from deployment, and what do? You start getting ready for the next one. And I'll tell you, even on the SSBNs that have a blue and gold crew, when you come back and you go into your what they call the pre-deployment training period, you get a little bit of time off, and then you start getting ready for that next patrol. And that training period can be as challenging as the actual at sea time.
Well, I think you told me in some of our previous conversations that when you're at sea, it's not, you're constantly training. Is that,
yeah. It's always things going on. And I think that helps with the time. Everybody's got a job. Everybody's busy. You continue to work and train and get ready for the next mission.
And When were you? When did you become a rear admiral, sir?
So that was in 2006. So I had the opportunity to go to Space and Naval Warfare Command. So I come back to the Naval Sea Systems Command, was put in charge of the torpedo program. Got to run that for a while, and then moved over as the Navy's role changed. I ran the undersea mobility program, which was building delivery vehicles for SEALs, which was a lot of fun and a great opportunity. And I was fortunate enough that I was the guy that had the right skills for a job that came open, and got promoted in 2006, and then it was a tough assignment, Frank. I had to run the Undersea Warfare Center in Newport, Rhode Island, and out in Bremerton, Washington. So I used to tell people, never bring the Chief of Naval Operations to see my office, because it looked down over Connington Bay towards the Newport Bridge. It's the greatest spot in the Navy to this day, I'm convinced.
That's tremendous. You know, as a commander of any naval vessel, a commander has two responsibilities, I think, and I'd like to ask your opinion. First responsibility is to carry out the mission that the Navy assigns you, to protect this country. Mm-hmm. But you also have a second mission, and that is to promote, protect the welfare, help the crew members advance up the ladder, and to take care of them. Does that sometimes conflict? I mean, again, your mission, I assume, at least in the Army and the Air Force, the mission was carry out the mission. That was the number one thing. But was it ever a conflict with those?
It's always a balance, right? Even when you talk to your detailers about where you're going to go next, it's always that needs of the Navy versus what you want to do. And I will tell you, the cruise was the same thing. It's about balancing the mission and the good of the crew. And really, it's a family effort. It's not just about the guys that are assigned to the ship. It's also about their families. And in that regards, I was blessed to have a bride that was able to do a lot of that work and help that piece.
Well, it must really be a hardship on the spouses of the men. Speaking of that, are there any women in submarine service these days?
There are now. That was I was just at the front end of that, so I did not have women on my ship. We had women come aboard for overnight midshipman operations, but that didn't start until toward the end of my naval career. So actually about 2005 time frame, the Navy started putting women on the Trident submarines, and now they're fully integrated into those crews.
Well, that's amazing. Again, the wives of submariners who are out for 6 months, they have to raise their children, live their lives, and worry about their spouses, because being on a submarine, even though it may not be a war, it still is somewhat hazardous. By the way, did you get hazardous pay as a submariner?
I did a couple of times. Yep, you did get hazardous duty pay. And separation bonuses, too, for being gone from your family. So it was like $60 a month or something like that. I don't remember. But to your point, that part of it, I think, is sometimes overlooked, and that being what the wise role is. Because without a strong spouse network, without a really good ombudsman that can work with the commanding officer's wife and can take care of those families, it doesn't work. Because what you've really done is, in some cases, you have this 17-year-old wife who's never been out on her own before, who depends on her husband for everything, and now you take the husband away and you go to sea for 6 months, and that wife is looking for a support network, doesn't know maybe how to balance her budget, doesn't know you can't spend all that advance pay right at the beginning of the deployment, or you won't be able to pay your bills later. And really, if it wasn't for that wife's network, the spousal network, none of this would work. So big hats off to those heroes as well.
So I probably should be interviewing your wife.
I think so. That's probably the next one you got to do.
But I assume, and maybe I assume wrong, that the Navy did have some help personnel or networks to help the people.
Oh yeah.
But there are limitations to that. I mean, it's not as personal as having your next door, the wife of a commander coming over to help, it's not, I assume, as personal as that. and probably not as helpful as having.
Well, there are. I mean, the Navy. I give the Navy credit. It wasn't just we'll leave all the wives and you go figure it out. They did offer a lot of support systems. You had the ombudsman system, which was usually a wife of one of the senior enlisted that was a direct conduit with the captain to help with managing that side of the business, and to the commanding officer's wife. You had morale, welfare, and recreation, which was a support system. You had, when you had a problem like a casualty or something, or if there was a death in the family, there was a casualty and calls system that helped support the families. But a lot of it worked through that network that that spouse organization that helped keep things going.
Yeah, you after you finished your submarine career, and you've already told us a little bit about subsequently. When did you retire, sir?
So I retired. Well, I retired from the Navy in 2007. Transitioned, as we like to say, transitioned. And
which is a better word.
It is a better word. It was a better word. And then it was interesting because they, just an aside, there's a training program that they, just like everything else you get trained for, they train you how to transition out of the Navy. And the program is called What's Next? And it helps you go figure out, well, what are you going to do next? And I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to go work for a commercial utility, a nuclear power utility, and put some of my skills and training to use in that environment. Got to do that for about 16 years.
And how did you get to New Smyrna Beach, Florida, sir?
My wife's mom and dad were down here, so this was where we would come to visit whenever we had leave from the Navy. So back to that, get a little bit of time off. Where do you go? We'd go to New Smyrna Beach. We'd stay on my mother-in-law's boat, and this kind of became like home. So when it was time to say, well, where are we going to go retire, it was a natural selection.
You know, Admiral, our time is coming to an end now. I'm going to ask you just one question. What's the best memories of your career in the Navy? What can you probably got a lot of memories, so that's probably an unfair question. But if you can pick your best memory.
I think my best memory, I mean, there's a lot of great stories and a lot of fun stories we could tell over an adult beverage probably, but I think my best memory is coming in from my final patrol, and the crew all wanting to go topside and dress out in whites.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
That would be
and
very...
have my wife and my son on board.
Oh my
that was
God.
it.
Oh,
that's the best one.
Oh, I can imagine that. That's that kind of makes me have chills. Thinking about those crews and the respect for you, sir. So, well, sir, our time has come to an end. Again, Admiral, I want to thank you for your service to this
thank you, sir. And thanks for doing this. Thanks for your effort.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
You had to put up with me for 45 minutes.
It's been great, sir. And the audience is going to love it. So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.